In this video, I'm going to be making a wind-blown Christmas tree using off-center turning, or more accurately using multi-axis turning. I'm starting by marking the center on this 2x2 by 7-inch block of maple. For those of you in the rest of the world, that's about 5 centimeters by about 18 centimeters long. Normally, I would put 4 lines on both sides of the blank to find the exact center, but today I'm only marking 2 lines so I can see it better while I'm creating different center points. I drew this out so that you can picture what each axis will look like. Each section of the tree will be turned on one axis, and then we will move to the next for the next section. I'm going to go ahead and mark the center point on the headstock side of the blank, and this is the one that we'll never have to move. So that'll be good. But on the other side, I'm going to get out my ruler, measuring tape, whatever you have, so that I can mark different points along this line so that we can move the center and change the axis when we want to on the tailstock side. At the intersection of our 2 lines, I'm going to mark our original center point. Now we can lay out a new center for each axis that we'll be turning on. I'll make marks that are about 1/8 of an inch or about 3 or 4 millimeters on each side of our original center point. And the reason that we're marking them so close is that we're working with a radius. When we move the center, it affects the whole diameter of the section. So if we go too big, we'll run out of wood in our blank, and that'll create flat spots. So I'm going to go ahead and make 2 marks on each side of our center point. So it gives us a total of 5 axes that we can turn on. Now I'm not going to start labeling these right at our original center point. I'm going to start at the outside. That way we'll move across the wood blank as we change to each different axis. So I'm going to label these starting at the top, going 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that way we'll move completely across our wood blank, and as we go up and get smaller on our tree, we'll have plenty of wood to work with. Now we're going to start with our original center point, which is number 3, to just rough out the blank and make it round. Now there's lots of different ways you can rough a piece to round. Basically, I just want to knock the corners down to get it into a cylinder so I have something to start with and so I don't have to reach my tool over as far. So I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge. We'll just rest that on the tool rest and make a few passes across, and we'll make this into a cylinder first. After I get done rounding, I'm going to take a pencil and I'm just going to lay out where I want this tree to live in our wood blank. So I'm going to make a small base and a trunk, and then this will be the first section that we turn. And it's the largest, and just like on an evergreen tree, as we move up the tree, the sections will get smaller. So I'm just going to put some lines on here. They'll end up getting turned away anyways. This is just for my mind to see where I want this tree to live in our wood blank. This is the point where we want to move our axis. So I'm going to move off of that center point, our original center, number 3, and we're going to move to number 1, and that will change the axis that we can turn the next section of our piece on. And remember, when you set this up, move your tool rest and then rotate it so you can make sure you're going to clear that tool rest. Now we can begin to shape our tree. And one good thing to do is bring the speed up. Start slow and bring it up. You definitely don't want to turn too slow, but you don't want to turn too fast either. So we'll go ahead and bring it up to, I'm turning somewhere around 2000 RPM. So I'll use my parting tool to just cut away some material under the base so that when I take that off later, it's nice and flat to this axis. And then I'll make a series of cuts to make a trunk. And I like to do the trunk in the first section all on this first axis that we're working on. After a few passes, I'll have to come back and clear away some material so that I can go deeper on my cut to make the trunk. So I'll just take this down a little at a time. I'll go a little bit deeper, and then I can go back and I can take a few more passes on this base and the trunk to come up and match it up nicely. After that, we can start the first section of the bottom boughs of our Christmas tree. So I'm just going to remove a little material here to make it round in this section and try and get that to where it's concentric first. And then I'll go ahead and do what I did before and just start taking passes. I'm not going to go as deep as I did on the trunk, but I'll just start taking a few passes and coming straight across and making this look like the bottom section of our tree. And at some point I'll have to stop again and I'll have to turn the gouge around and we'll have to remove some more material. And I like to kind of make a V shape and come right down to a point in the bottom. And that helps me match it up really well so that it looks good. I'll just remove a little bit more material from the next section. I don't want to do too much here because I don't want to interfere with the next section and where it's going to end up on the next axis. So I'll go ahead and just take a few passes and just try and match this up really well down into the bottom of that V. Just really lightly will help you match that up a lot better. And then go back and forth. And finally, we'll have something that we can call the bottom of our tree. And at this point, I want to sand. And you'll have to sand in sections, because if you don't, you won't get the chance to sand unless you are able to keep every single center that you had on there and go back and re-sand when you're all done with the tree. So it's best now to just start sanding, and I start with about a 180 grit on this piece. And then I'll move and do a 220. And for this one, I'm not really going to do any much more than that. It worked out to where it was really smooth after 220, and I was happy with that. But you can always sand up to like 400 or 600 grit if that's what you wish. So we'll do the next sanding grit just to show you that this doesn't take a whole lot of time and it's pretty easy to do on each section. All right, and so that's all we'll need to do on our first section. Now it's time to move to a new axis. So we've already turned on axis number 1 for our bottom section. So now we want to move to axis number 2 that's labeled there. And so we'll put it down, bring up the tailstock into number 2 and set that. And this section will do much like the first. We'll remove a little bit of material to get it down to where this is round. And you can see I'll just do that with my spindle gouge. And I want to get this down to where it's a little bit smaller than the diameter that I had before. And then we'll just take a series of passes down into the V. Then we'll remove material on the right-hand side. And then just keep working that down until it looks like the next section. And then we can go ahead and sand 180 and 220 one more time. Now we're going to want to move to the next axis again, and this is one that we've already turned on before, axis 3, which was our original center point. And there should be some marks there already, which will make it easy to engage the tailstock and our live center. And so we'll go ahead and remove some material, and we'll want to remove just a little bit more material and get it down to a diameter that's shorter than the section that was before it. Then again, we'll go ahead and make a series of passes and then bring it down to a V, make a series of more passes, and then just work our way down into that V. And we just want it to look like the diameter is getting smaller and smaller as we go down. It's a little hard to tell sometimes because The sections before it get kind of fuzzy as they're turning on a different axis. So sometimes you just have to stop the lathe and check. Okay, so now we're going to turn on axis number 4. And so we'll go ahead and move it to that axis. And then we're just going to want to remove a little bit more material. And we can totally remove these lines now. We don't really need them. We can do the rest of the tree by look. So we'll go ahead and just keep removing a lot of material from the whole piece. And then we'll start making our series of cuts again. To just bring this down and finish this section, just like we did before. And on this one, sometimes you want to stop and look and make sure that you're getting it down far enough. Because the next section is going to be the peak, and we want to have this one down far enough so it looks like we will have enough room to make the next one quite a bit smaller. We'll go ahead and sand this section up, just like we did before, and move to the next center. Now we're going to move to axis number 5, which is kind of in the middle of all those circles, but we can find it there. It's labeled. And when we bring up the tailstock this time, we want to make sure we don't put too much pressure on this piece, because we're going to get a thin top here and we don't want it to break. So if we have too much pressure, it'll do that. So now I'm just going to remove some material on the end to get it out of the way. And you don't want too much if you want to use those center points again. But we'll just remove some material so I can get a little bit closer with the tool rest and with my gouge. And at this point, I'm just going to remove material from both sides and bring it down here so we can form the top of our tree. And I'll just start removing a little bit from each side at a time and working my way down. One side and then the other. And then we'll just bring this down till it's really kind of small. I'm somewhere around 1/8 of an inch, maybe just a little bit bigger than that when I get to the top of the tree here. And I don't want to take too much off at a time, and just be very careful and take light passes. And then I'm not going to bring it down to a point yet. We're going to actually do that with sandpaper. I just want to leave enough length so that I have a little bit of room to shape it when I'm all done. So we'll go ahead and sand it now while it's on that section. And then the last thing we'll need to do is just grab our pull saw and hang on to the tree tight and go ahead and just a little bit above where our doweled section is at, go ahead and start the cut and then bring that through and cut off that section. And now what you're going to want to do is take that little tenon on the bottom and cut it off as well. And then you can go ahead and sand it flat. It's not too hard to do, just use light pressure and take a few passes on a heavy grit sandpaper, on a wheel, or on a belt sander. Be careful to keep your fingers away from the sandpaper. And then I've got a little sanding disc here that I'll put in the lathe. And I'll just kind of bring that around, and we're going to just shape the top here and bring it down to where it's almost a point. It's almost kind of like a dull point. And then we'll do a little bit of hand sanding on that. Just to smooth it up so it looks about the same as the rest of our piece. And then we can finish that however we want, with oil or lacquer, and it makes a nice little tree that you can use as a Christmas shelf-sitting decoration.